sure you think your way through it a little bit.
Hi, I'm Jackie Reid and welcome to Lethal's Last Word for round 13. There's some big games to look at this weekend, and the first one we're going to focus on is the Friday night clash at Etihad Stadium between the league leader Hawthorn and the West Coast Eagles. And Lee, as I welcome you, at the start of the season this would have been a heavyweight battle, but the Eagles haven't been playing their best footy.
Yeah, it hasn't worked for the Eagles this year. I mean, the Hawthorn have won their last 10, so they've certainly lived up to expectations. But, of course, the Eagles have lost 4 games at Subiaco. That's normally a fortress for them, so that's put them a long way behind the pace setters.
Well, let's take a look at the recent form for both sides.
Well, we saw last week, didn't play terribly well, Hawthorn, but they beat Carlton. Eagles come off the bye. They fell in against St Kilda in round 11, lost easily to Richmond in round 10 there. So, on that basis, Hawthorn are in much better form going into this game. But the Eagles have a fair few players back this week that are going to strengthen them from the week before.
Well, your individual key players for both of these teams, although being different types of players, you want to talk about the similarity in their football, beginning with the man who is the #1 ruckman in the AFL player ratings, Nick Naitanui.
Well, it's impact players, and Nick, let's start with the one for the Eagles. Now, if the Eagles are to win tomorrow night against Hawthorn, Naitanui has to have a really special game, I would have thought. And we're seeing in his highlights here, I mean, there's hit-outs to advantage and hit-outs that kill the opposition. And he has half a dozen of those a game where he has hit-outs that get it to his running player, and then every now and again he clears the ball himself. We know he can go forward and take a big grab. Again, you can't depend on him being the match winner, but he can do really special things with low numbers. And in this high stats era, he doesn't need to touch the football a whole lot for the Eagles to be in really good shape.
Well, what about Hawks skipper Luke Hodge? How is he similar to Nick Nat?
Well, same, low possessions. Last week against Carlton, he had, this is a really high era of footy. I mean, when midfielders get 35 possessions, but he had 15 disposals last week, Luke Hodge, but his brute force in the middle of the ground made him, to me, the most influential player on the ground, even though he only had the 15 disposals. We know he's good with ball in hand, but I think it's his leadership and his whole strength of will, strength of character, strength of body that really sets Hawthorn up, and doesn't need a lot of the footy, and last week proved that.
Well, let's look at your key matchup. It's Brian Lake versus Josh Kennedy, the fullback versus the full forward. We'll focus on Brian Lake first. After his game against the Blues last week, it was probably his best for the club, wasn't it?
Well, he was the opportunist recruit, of course. Came across from the Bulldogs over the summer period. But don't say last week was his best game, particularly late in the game. If you kick the ball long and high into Hawthorn's defensive 50, Brian Lake just stands under the footy. And he doesn't necessarily spoil, he marks the ball. He basically stops his opponent getting the ball by marking it. So from that point of view, he's a really good defender, can play on the big, strong opposition forwards. And this week, this will probably be his opponent, Josh Kennedy. And one of the things we know about the Eagles, they are a good team marking inside 50. They average 17 inside 50 marks, which is 17 shots at goal when they win the game. And Josh Kennedy, Jack Darling, players like that, they're the players. And I think the Lake-Kennedy matchup, that's critical, I think. Kennedy has to be well on top, I would have thought, in that for the Eagles to win.
OK, Lee, last word. Who's going to win?
Well, I think you have to stick with Hawthorn. They're in really good shape. They're in really good form. As the Eagles have got a much better side in this week. Lacra's back in, Glass is back in, Kennedy's back in. So they look much better shape, but certainly Hawthorn this week.
Well, that's Lethal's last word on the Battle of the Birds, the Hawks taking on the Eagles. On Sunday at Patterson Stadium, the Fremantle Dockers host North Melbourne. And Lee, a lot of people have already written off the Kangaroos, but if they lose this one, they can really start planning their September holidays.
Yeah, they're running out of chances. You've got to win at least 12 games to play finals, so they've got to win 8 of their last 11. So playing Fremantle in Perth the way the Dockers have been in 2013 is a very difficult task.
Well, let's take a look at the last 3 weeks for both sides.
Well, Fremantle just keep winning. Beat Brisbane easy enough last week. They just beat Adelaide by only 7 points. I saw the Gold Coast game. It was wet up there. I didn't think the wet conditions suited the Kangaroos, but nevertheless, after three-quarter time, they were terrible against the Gold Coast.
Well, let's take a look at your key stat, and these numbers emphasise the contrasting styles of both of the sides.
Well, it's one of the reasons why I think the Kangaroos have a pretty good chance over. I think the Kangaroos are better than a 4-7 win-loss ratio. They can score. They've kicked 169 goals. The Dockers have only kicked 144. Clearly what the Dockers are good at is not allowing the opposition to kick goals against them. They've only had 110 against them. But the fact that the Kangaroos can move the ball quickly, get a bit of flow in their game, I think they've got some chance of actually being suited by the big ground at Subiaco.
Well, the key players in this encounter, and firstly we'll look at the Kangaroos. You've gone for two of their players, Daniel Wells and Brent Harvey.
Well, they lead that ball flow. I mean, these are the game breakers for the Kangaroos. Andrew Swallow's a good getter in close, players like that. But Wells and Harvey, they're the ones who are going to carry the ball on those wide open spaces of Subiaco if the Kangaroos are going to play well. You'd think a Ryan Crowley would probably try and do the stopping job on Daniel Wells. He's normally the first player against the Kangaroos. Maybe Clancy Pearce, I'm not quite sure, but I would have thought Ross Lyon often likes to really blunt the opposition's strength, so I suspect both Wells and Harvey will have a direct tagging matchup.
Well, we'll go to your key player for the Dockers, and it's Garrick Ibbotson. He had a great match last week against the Brisbane Lions.
Well, Garrick Ibbotson isn't the kind of player you'd think would be your key player, but he epitomises what's going on at the Dockers. They're getting so much out of players who aren't exactly household names. Last week, it was maybe the best game of his career. 28 disposals, 27 of them in defence. He's mainly playing off the back line. They've got a good back group. Dawson, McFarlane, Johnson give them good height in the air. Duffield's their main rebounder, but all of a sudden Ibbotson's gone back there and is starting to bring the ball out of defence really well. So there's so many players at the Fremantle that are playing much better than their reputations say they should.
Well, he's pretty underrated. Do you think that opposition clubs will start going to him to try to crack down on that forward pressure?
I don't think quite yet, Jackie. I think if you're going to do that, Duffield is probably the ball carrier that you're first going to sit on. But Ibbotson, typical of the Fremantle lesser brigade, who are really doing well.
OK, Lee, last word. Who's going to win this one?
Well, I can't tip against Fremantle because they keep winning, but if there is an outsider this round, the Kangaroos at Subiaco, if they play their really free-flowing game, they've got a chance. But no logic to it would make you pick against Fremantle. OK, let's go to all of your tips from round 13, beginning with the Hawks playing host to the Eagles. Well, I like to do it out of 10 if Wave chance. I think Hawks are going to win 8 or 9 out of 10 against the Eagles. Again, if Natanui has a good game, maybe the Eagles can win. I think the Swans, even against Power in Adelaide, are going to win 8 or 9 out of 10. Well, it's been an unusual week for St Kilda and certainly an unusual week for Melbourne as well. But I'll go to St Kilda. I think they're a better side. I think Melbourne at the moment aren't going to win many. Maybe St Kilda are going to beat them 8 out of 10. I think Richmond will beat the Bulldogs just at the moment. They're in really good shape, Richmond. They're 8 or 9 out of 10 against the Bulldogs. I already tipped the Dockers, of course, to win that game. I reckon that's probably about a 7 out of 10 this week. And now here's another outside. The Lions have got their best side on the field that they've had for 4, 5, 6 weeks, maybe the whole season. But Geelong is such a good team, you couldn't tip against them. So I reckon Geelong are probably going to win 7 out of 10 against the Lions at the Gabba. Well, thanks for that, Lee. Thanks, Jackie. That's another edition of Lethal's Last Word. There promises to be some exciting football played this weekend. Enjoy all the action and we'll see you next time.